And hello everybody, welcome back to episode number 161 of the CheckX series. If you're new here, as I say every single day, the CheckX series is pretty much all about me, your host Ivan, discussing everything that Jan discusses on X the day before. Today we're going to talk about what he talked about yesterday on Saturday, May 16th, 2026. He posted just around 78 times yesterday, so going to be a relatively longer episode here, but not too long obviously. I'm going to try to keep it in the 10-minute range today, but we are pretty much just going to get right into the episode here, not to keep this intro rolling too long for you guys. Starting off, not as we usually do today, with SpaceX, IPO, strategy, and future goals, specifically. Starting off this segment, Elon engaged with a detailed proposal regarding a potential SpaceX IPO, possibly under the ticker SPCX, which is a pretty solid. It looks cool, is what I'm trying to say. And how he could use qualified opportunity zone funds to defer and potentially eliminate capital gains taxes while reinvesting in infrastructure like Starbase Texas, for example, or a semiconductor fab called the TerraFab, which we've talked about before. Quite a long while since we talked about it. But moving on, Elon explicitly stated, "I'm not selling any shares," and responded to reports of a potential $1 trillion pay deal tied to the successful establishment of a colony on Mars. Moving on, Elon also noted that most airlines are now partnering with Starlink for superior Wi-Fi and highlighted its new operations in Uganda and on Emirates A380 aircraft, which is the biggest passenger airplane currently in the sky. So that's very cool to see. Last but not least for this segment, Elon noted the successful launch and landing of the CRS-34 mission, and moving on to XAI and Grok development. Starting off this segment, XAI is working on version 9 of its foundation model, which features 1.5 trillion parameters and is optimized for Blackwell chips. I'm assuming that's referring to NVIDIA chips. Elon also described it as substantially better in every way than previous version 8, and also Elon highlighted new experimental commands for Grok, which is /memory, /flush, and /dream. Designed to give users first-class control over agent memory and context consolidation. Very cool. Last but not least, Elon also responded to user feedback on the Grok build interface, promising rapid improvement for the coding agent. Since it's just released, there might be a couple bugs and it needs some corrections. They're releasing it as like a beta, I'm assuming, just to try it out and have, testers, figure out what's wrong with it and where it needs help and stuff like that. But moving on to the X platform and social media, or Twitter, whatever you really want to call it. Starting off this segment, Elon emphasized that X is the only open source platform, unlike others that manipulate results behind closed doors. And Elon also stated the goal of the X algorithm is simply to show users content they find interesting without a thumb on the scale. Last but not least for this segment, Elon also made disparaging remarks about Instagram, suggesting it is for girls and not for grown men. Moving on to Neuralink progress, just one thing to add on here, but Elon shared the story of Audrey, a paralyzed clinical trial participant who is now able to create art using a Neuralink brain-computer interface. Very cool. We've talked about Audrey before, I believe. But moving on to talking about critique and moving into the politics segment of this episode, critique of wokeism and French theory. Starting out this segment, talking about the mental virus, Elon heavily amplified a detailed critique of French theory, attributing it to philosophers like Foucault, Derrida, and Deleuze, arguing it acts as a mental virus that deconstructs truth, merit, and Western civilization. Moving on, Elon also agreed that Jean-Jacques Rousseau, excuse me if I'm pronouncing that wrong, was the original sin of modern progressivism, for they believe that man is born good and only corrupted by society. And last but not least, Elon reposted data regarding the measurable rise of mentions of prejudice in academic papers, linking it to the woke mind virus in academia. Very interesting, very concerning there. But moving on to DEI in Hollywood and the Academy Awards. Starting off this segment, you want to attack the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences for implementing DEI requirements for Best Picture eligibility, calling the individuals responsible douchebags for prioritizing quotas over the quality of films. And last but not least for this segment, Neon accused director Christopher Nolan of pandering and desecrating Homer's The Odyssey by race swapping characters to meet these diversity standards, calling it death to art. Yikes. But moving on to justice and suicidal empathy before we pretty much start wrapping up this episode here. Starting off this segment, talking about the Gad Sad's thesis, Elon endorsed Gad Sad's book. Suicidal empathy, which argues that misguided kindness leads to catastrophic policy decisions. And last but not least for this episode, Elon argued that the political left has a fundamental moral flaw: empathy for criminals which is empathy for criminals rather than empathy for their victims, which we've seen it happen time and time again. But yeah, that's a whole different thing to get down into. But ladies and gentlemen, like I said, that pretty much wraps up episode number 161 of the CheckX series. If you made it all the way to the end, I appreciate you for watching. I recommend dropping a like, commenting, and subscribing if you haven't already. I also recommend going back and watching some of the other recent CheckX episodes to pretty much do a sequence of events based on what Elon says every single day on Twitter. Again, that's completely up to you, but what do you think of this? What do you think of this news today? Just let me know in the comments if you would like. But yeah, that pretty much wraps up this episode. I'm your host, Ivan, and I'll see you guys later.